A form of ketamine was recently approved by the
Hi guys! Happy Monday! Oh my god, my hair is crazy. I'm so sorry. I realized that I had not brushed my hair at all today until about 2 minutes before. Because I woke up this morning and I had to take a phone call and then I jumped right into researching something. So here's what you get. Thanks, Druid. Hey, Robin. Happy New Year. You lurk all you need to. So this is a new friend. This is Clementine the cat. I think I showed you the pattern for her when I came back from England, and I finally finished making her. Hamish the Highland Coo, or the Heeland Coo, the cow. I finished him a long time ago. So anyway, she gets to join the gang. Ah! So I just had to share, because I did lots of stuff this weekend. I did a lot of sewing, and I did a bunch of reading and research. But alas, sometimes, it's late at night and you want to watch TV. And so you sew something frivolous. So today, I don't know if you noticed the title, but I titled it The Wild and Untamed Quilts of Baltimore. And what we're going to look at today is actually Baltimore album quilts. Wild and Untamed, if you're unaware, comes from what Dr. Dunton called them. Dr. William Rush Dunton is my he was my first big topic in quilt study. He remains important quilt study to me. So um I want to look at some of the stuff today that, people have. He was kind of the first to identify, and I don't know that he actually coined the term Baltimore album quilts. People have said that, and I cannot find anywhere in his writing where he coined that. So maybe I've missed it. But they came to be known as Baltimore album quilts, but he called them wild and untamed because they were so interesting looking. So we're gonna look at some. Um, Before we get to that, just really quick, Jill and I start this book tomorrow, which is called Mauve: How One Man Invented a Color That Changed the World. This is about William Perkin. And we start reading this tomorrow. I'm so excited because this is an interesting topic. We've heard his name a bunch. Anytime we read about color, we hear William Perkin, but this apparently is the saga of the color. And this weekend, as I was doing some reading and flipping through some books, just out of nowhere, this book, and it's really about like fiber technology. So, all of these applications they're using like in medical science and all kinds of things that sort of use textiles as kind of a jumping off point. There's a 2-page spread with pictures and stuff about William Perkin in there. So I was like, what? This is so cool. Serendipity. You start looking at something and you see it everywhere. I think it's a case of that. So, all right, let's jump right in because I only picked a certain number of pictures to show you, but as we know, I can talk forever. So, why don't we jump in? Oh, and before I forget, this coming Thursday, I will not be here. So no stream on Thursday, but I'll be back the following Monday, which I think is the 12th, I think. So just remember that. Put it on your calendar. So first thing I'm going to show you, let's move over to my other screen. This is not bragging, but this is not all of them, but this is many of my Baltimore album books. And Eliz has the lion's share here. I also had a Dina Katzenberg book, which I cannot find right now. I think it's upstairs. And I just didn't feel like digging. I just didn't have time. Sorry. But Jennifer Goldsboro is this one, Lavish Legacies. I'm going to show you stuff, and I'm actually going to read you a piece from her book. Baltimore Basics is my friend Mimi Dietrich. She teaches classics or like classic Baltimore album blocks, but she simplifies them greatly. Because you guys have seen Baltimore album quilts before, but we're gonna look at a few that continue to boggle my mind because I think all of the detail and all of the overlapping stuff, all the flowers, all the stuff, it's a lot. So, Mimi, she learned applique. She always says she learned applique from a very old woman in the 70s. And she cracks me up. But anyway, she started doing these more simplified Baltimore album quilts. Then I have a miniature Baltimore album quilt. I totally I forget about this one. I bought it specifically because I wanted to make some little Baltimore album type things. And I keep coming back to it and then forgetting I have it. And then all the rest of these, with the exception of this one here is the Baltimore album quilt engagement calendar. Once they started those engagement calendars, the quilt engagement calendars, I think it was Carter Houck and somebody else who started those. Lots of engagement calendars have shown up because people like them. People don't actually use them as calendars. I have seen a few that I've gotten secondhand that people have written in, but for the most part, people use them for the pictures. So that's what this one is. And then all of these kind of around the outside are Eliz, who is not just a longtime researcher, but also a teacher of Baltimore album quilting. Her books are, her blocks and her projects are a lot more detailed than Mimi Dietrich's. They're like, Mimi Dietrich is like the 101, and Eliz was all the way from 101 all the way up to like graduate level. So, lots of detail in there. And I have a couple of things out of this big red book to show you. This one, the Baltimore album quilt tradition. This one was interesting because a bunch of Baltimore album quilts went to Japan. And so that is actually a Japanese book. And a lot of the quilts that are in some of these other historical places, like Lavish Legacies and this calendar, um, are displayed in that book, because there's only a, I don't want to say that there's like only the set amount of, of Baltimore album quilts, but there's a set amount of Baltimore album quilts. They were made during a very narrow time frame. They did influence other types of album quilts, and they sort of spread out. Um, but these very specific style ones, that still exist, that people have found through the research, is kind of a finite group of quilts. So, and Dr. Dunton, one of the quilts that is my absolute favorite quilt of all time. Um, and I didn't do very good research on it after I saw it in Dunton's collection. Turns out I think it's at the Baltimore Museum of Art, if I remember correctly. It might be at the Historical Society, but in any event, I could make an appointment to see this quilt. And for the longest time, I completely neglected that. It is documented all over the place. It's the Rachel Meyer quilt. But anyway, finite group of quilts. So I wanted to look at some of this, and because I have a lot of questions. Baltimore album quilts are not my research topic, although people often think they are because of Dr. Dunton. Dr. Dunton, my research is really on him and his process and all of the things he did versus exactly what he studied. So I feel like I've seen lots of album quilts. I've been to the exhibitions of them. I still feel like there's a lot I don't know. So I thought we would look at them today. So like I said, we're mainly going to look at Lavish Legacies, the engagement calendar, and then Ellie Sienkiewicz's book. So let us jump in. All right, so Ellie Sienkiewicz's book, this is an interesting book. And I'm not going to read anything from this book, although she has some really good. And I mean, this is the book. It's big. It's like a big, like, soft cover. It's got cool stuff on the back of it. It's called Spoken Without a Word. And I think she re-released this at some point, but this particular issue, or edition, is from 1972. It's slightly rare. I looked it up. There's a bunch of copies of it on Amazon right now, but it's kind of like Dunton's book or Florence Pito's books. I feel like there's these seasons where they show up. Lots of them show up. So this one's available. If you're interested in it, it's on eBay. I also have an extra copy of it that I'm happy to pass along for what I paid for it. A little bit more expensive than what's on eBay right now. So just a heads up. But what you're seeing on the screen here is one of the pages, and her approach to this is to make these sort of picture-like versus breaking them down into all the parts. And she does kind of explain that some. So like this is sort of like an appreciation book / if you want to make one of these, this is what's in it. But I mean, look at this. Look at all of these flowers. Look at all of this basket work. It's all very minute and detailed, and a lot going on here. The book, the bird. We're gonna look at these things more. But I just like this one. It's got a lot going on. I can't remember exactly which quilt it's from. We might be looking at the quilt that it's from. I can't remember. This is another one. This is something that I've made note of some of the quilts that have this. And I was at one of the exhibitions, actually the Wild and Untamed exhibit, at the Maryland Center for History and Culture, which is the Historical Society. This shows up in quilts, and I heard somebody saying, like, what is that? Like, what is that building? Like, what is that? This is the Baltimore Washington Monument. So, of course, everyone knows the Washington Monument in D.C. Big, long obelisk. This is Baltimore's version of it. Much shorter. I mean, you can see this is the door. So if you can imagine a person, it's much shorter. Oddly enough, I went on this like city scavenger hunt thing. It was like an Alice in Wonderland themed scavenger hunt. And our meeting place was the Baltimore Monument, the Baltimore Washington Monument. So I thought that was funny. But this shows up in a bunch of quilts. And I think it's one of those things like it was probably new at the time. And, Baltimore getting its own Washington Monument was kind of like maybe a big deal. So I'm thinking it's the time period. I haven't really looked into it, but I mean, that's my hypothesis, but there could be a reason. But anyway, it's a very simple building monument thing. I mean, it is a building. Like there's a little thing in the bottom. You can go inside. It's not open to the public, but a person can go inside. The tower part of it, I don't know what's in there. It's not like the Washington Monument, like you go visit the inside of it. So, but anyway, it is commonly seen. And we're going to look at some other stuff that what I really love about the calendar, that they show some comparisons. And I really love that. So this is one, and I think that this book is best for these things because they're not quite life-sized. This book is just over 12 inches square. So like 12 and a half inches square. Most Baltimore album blocks, I mean, of course there's exceptions, but many of them are large, like 16 inches. So 12 to 16 inches, but you could easily blow this up a little bit bigger, or make a 16-inch block with a 12-inch thing in it. But this is a wreath I thought that was really pretty. And this is an example of something that I think probably not a beginner's quilt or beginner's block to make, but this is if you have some applique experience. I think this is the kind of block that's like kind of cool to jump into because it's got some challenging stuff in it, but it's not so overly wrought that you're doing layers and layers and layers of flowers. So I liked this one. I thought, I might make this block. And then this one is indicative of some things that we often see on Baltimore album quilts, which is this pictorial look. It's literally like a little picture in the block. And, the Baltimore's Washington Monument is kind of like that, but this is really specific in that this is a man hunting. He's got a dog, and he's obviously hunting, like, I don't know, doves, ducks. They look like they've got pointy beaks, so I don't think they're ducks. He's, I guess, in the woods, so they would be, I don't know, doves, pigeons, I don't know. And his dog has got one of the birds. And so this is just this little sample of life at the time. And then these wild framing is really interesting too. All right, now we're getting into Lavish Legacies. And I have stuff to read you here. So many bookmarks. Actually, before I read you about this particular quilt, which is a Mary Simon quilt, by the way, or supposed Mary Simon quilt, let me read you this chapter. It's just a couple pages from the book. And this is Lavish Legacies. The funny thing about this book, I looked for it for a really long time. I knew it was this catalog. It's got an immense catalog in the back of it of all of these quilts. And I couldn't find it. So finally I broke down and I bought it directly from the Maryland Historical Society. They had copies of it at the museum, Maryland Center for History and Culture. And no sooner had I paid full price minus my member discount there at the museum, I have had opportunities to get this book over and over and over, either for free or for just a fraction of what I paid for it. So every time I see that, I'm like, all right, I'm paying it forward. Somebody else can have the freebie. I paid full price. Anyway, it's just funny, like as soon as I broke down and was like, all right, I'm going to buy it. It comes to me. So, this book was written, it was put together in 1994, and published by the Maryland Historical Society, which is now the Maryland Center for History and Culture. Interestingly enough, it was created here in Maryland. It was typeset and everything here in Maryland. T. Rowe Price was responsible for the catalog, like the I guess the funds, the grant to create the catalog of this textile collection. So I thought that was really interesting. T. Rowe Price is sort of a big deal in Baltimore. Lots of people work there. They donate a lot of money to all kinds of different, social and arts and even sporting stuff. It's really kind of interesting. I think, of all of these major companies, T. Rowe Price, Under Armour, some of these organizations, I have to give them credit. They really do stay involved in their community, and they're uh, they donate to these kind of things. So their name is out there as being this supporter, of arts and community stuff. So. And the author of this book is Jennifer Faulds Goldsboro. And so it's Jennifer spelled the normal way. Her middle name, Faulds, and then her last name is spelled Goldsborough. So Jennifer Goldsboro. And so let's start with this first chapter. What is a Baltimore album quilt? The phrase Baltimore album quilt is a modern term referring to a specific type of 19th century bed covering with distinct characteristics. Baltimore album quilts were composed of individual cloth squares of uniform size arranged in a grid pattern. Occasionally, squares of double or quadruple size were grouped toward the center of the quilt to provide a focus reminiscent of earlier medallion-style quilts. So, think about the chintz medallions. In a few instances, the squares were arranged on point in diagonal rows. With few exceptions, Baltimore album quilt squares were large, usually approximately 16 inches square. The quilts, too, were usually square and of quite large size. Curiously, there was little organizational consistency, and squares might be oriented in many directions, sometimes radiating from the center, sometimes all facing one direction, sometimes in a seemingly random arrangement in which one or two squares appeared to be upside down. And she's got a specific quilt that this happened in. Let me see. It's not one we're going to look at, but I think what's happening in this particular quilt, yeah, there is one thing that's upside down. Sometimes I see these quilts, I think if they're presentation quilts, they're made so that when they're folded, like if they're hung over something, you can see them right side up from either side. And also sometimes that radiating out from the center is the same thing. When it's on the bed, depending on which side you're standing on or looking, you're seeing it right side up. So I think that's sometimes what was happening. Sometimes I think people probably just made mistakes and were like, okay, oh well, we'll just live with it. Baltimore album quilt squares were enhanced with a variety of intricate applique designs of two sorts. One type of design was created by folding and cutting complex, symmetrical, snowflake-like paper patterns. This sort of applique was related to German, I can never say this right, Scherenschnitt. Hopefully you guys know what I'm talking about. It's a German paper cutting. It's spelled SCHERENSCHNITTE. I think one of those words means scissors, I'm sure. So this is the art of making delicate and lacy cut paper designs. This style of applique was favored among the German-American residents of southern Pennsylvania and northern Maryland. And I think there's a particular style of Baltimore album quilts that are very Pennsylvania German, Pennsylvania Dutch looking. Simplified versions of this type of applique designs, such as reel and leaf, crossed laurel leaves, and fleur-de-lis patterns, were very popular on the red and green applique quilts of the mid-19th century and became part of the common American quilt design vocabulary. We're also going to read something, and let me go back one. So this is what she's talking about, like these little fleur-de-lis in the corner. This is quite possibly a paper cut pattern. And then these little leaves are kind of added on, or possibly even these flowers are not part of the paper cutting, but I think this outer part is definitely paper cutting. These might also be these corners. I know I might do it that way just to get them all the same size. But this red and green, I'm going to read you a few things from the calendar. They talk about this red and green stuff too. These designs continued to appear on Baltimore album quilts, especially in corner positions on the quilts throughout the 1840s and 1850s. The most delicate cut paper designs, resembling lace or cobwebs, usually appear on Baltimore album quilt squares made before 1850. And like the heyday of these quilts, particularly what you're looking at right now on the screen, this was like 1845 to 1850. It's a very narrow time frame. The second type of applique work on Baltimore album quilts featured realistic pictorial designs of compotiers of fruit, local landmarks, ships, people, symbols of organizations, and especially vases, wreaths, and baskets of flowers. These naturalistic designs were created by the clever manipulation and layering of imported and domestic fabrics. Details were embroidered or inked, and a sense of three-dimensionality was often created with padding or fabric selection and placement. So you'll see those kind of ombre prints, those ombre fabrics that give some dimension. The traditional stage of development of the very earliest pre-1848 Baltimore album quilts was sometimes revealed by the inclusion of chintz, appliqued, or finely pieced squares. Because you think like 1820s and before, you've got a lot of chintz medallions, the broderie purse chintz, and I think almost all of the Baltimore album exhibits I've seen start with these chintz quilts to show you this evolution. Both chintz and pieced stars or hexagonal, octagonal piece designs appear too infrequently for them to be considered significant alternatives to the cut paper and realistic pictorial applique designs in defining the Baltimore album style. Many Baltimore album quilts were assembled without sashing. Some of the earliest had red sawtooth sashing strips, which resembled pieced work but were often appliqued. And I've seen a number of these, and I think there's one that we'll see that I'm pretty sure is appliqued. Plain fabric strips or repetitive printed designs cut from striped fabric were sometimes used as sashing. Border prints also varied widely on Baltimore album quilts, ranging from no borders at all to simple bands of plain colored cloth, calico, or imported chintz. So you'll see some that, and I don't think I took pictures of any, but the chintz border looks like it's more like these intricately pieced until you get up close and see that it's a chintz print. Applique borders might be restrained geometric patterns or decoratively swagged drapery designs or sumptuously elegant and elaborate floral vines. So you see these are the swags. Baltimore album quilts were masterpieces of needlework and often exemplified numerous skills. The visual impact relied on the selection and variety of costly fabrics, the intricacy and detail of the applique designs, and the special effects of padding, fabric manipulation, embroidery, and inking. The quilting itself often was of secondary importance to the designs, fabrics, appliques, and embroidery. Only occasionally did quilters indulge in fancy feather, scroll, or other pictorial patterns for their fine, carefully quilted stitches. And I would say there's like not a lot of room to quilt on these. I mean, this one clearly has like these spaces in between. But honestly, if you've done this much applique, do you really have the energy for quilting? Most Baltimore album quilts were quilted in simple diamond, square, or other linear patterns. Many Baltimore album quilts were never quilted at all. Some applique tops seem to have been deliberately finished off with a light backing or lining and used as bedspreads. Others survived in an unfinished state. A considerable number of appliqued but unassembled quilt squares in the Baltimore album style also survive. And this is, I believe it's these squares, these unused ones, that kind of give some historical direction as to who is making some of this stuff. Quilts of this sort were called albums after the popularity of album books during the early 19th century. Young women treasured watercolor sketches, sentimental verses, dried flowers, the autographs of friends, and other mementos in pretty books called albums. Album quilts were like a collection of different cloth pages laid side by side, instead of bound between covers. In addition, many album quilt squares were inscribed with verses, names, and dates, which made them sentimental reminders, like album books, of an individual's friends and family. Album quilts of diverse applique squares were also made in other mid Atlantic regions, such as Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey, and New York. But those usually were simpler in design and employed a smaller square size than their Baltimore cousins. The dates and names written on quilts, meeting the Baltimore album quilt description, help us determine that, indeed, these magnificent textiles originated in Baltimore City or the immediately surrounding area and flourished around 1850. The earliest dated square in this genre, which was examined by the Maryland Historical Society staff, is inscribed with the year 1842. The dates on the most elaborate quilts and Maryland Institute Fair records indicate that the style was diminishing in popularity by 1854, although Maryland quilts continued to be influenced by this style until the Civil War period. So that's the 101 of what Baltimore album quilts are. So let us start with this lovely, and this is one of the Mary Simon quilts. So I'm just going to read a part of what this is, because this has got, there's stuff inked on this one. So there's inscribed names, and then there's a little bit of, I guess, genealogy data that is given here. So we'll skip that part. But so this is Baltimore album quilt, dated 1852. Designs attributed to Mary Simon, possibly made by friends and relatives of Laura Horton at the time of her marriage to Zedekiah Tarman. What a name. Or possibly made for Mary Heiner by women of the First Reformed Church. So we've got a pretty wide guesses on what this, and there may be more data coming out that has come out since. I do know, like, a number of papers have been written, and so, with this being originally published, did I say 1994? It is highly likely that, 1994. It is highly likely that some of these have been more, there's more clarity on where they belong and who they belong to. So square size, approximately 18 and a quarter by 16 and a half inches. And the quilt itself is approximately 107 by 105 inches. Not approximately. This exquisite quilt ranks among the finest dozen Baltimore album quilts known, and is thought to represent the work of the best known and most easily recognized master designer, Mary Simon. Few Baltimore album quilts combine such beautiful and well-coordinated designs, so many unusual fabrics, such a large number of poignant inscriptions, and such close ornamental quilting. The carefully composed floral squares may be judged as works of fine rather than folk art. This is one of the few quilts that may have been a wedding quilt. Most squares include the name of a female member of Laura Horton's family and a biblical quotation, primarily from the last chapter of the book of Proverbs, which describes a virtuous woman. Sadly, the bride died within a year or so of her marriage, and the quilt is believed to have then been inherited by her sister or young niece and passed down through that family in Frederick, Maryland, which is about 45 minutes west of the city. A recently discovered 1888 Horton family letter, which may refer to this quilt, talks about a quilt made by women of the First Reformed Church and presented to their pastor's wife, Mary Heiner. That quilt was eventually given to Elizabeth Parrish Slick, daughter of Catherine Horton Parrish. Catherine was the niece of Laura Horton Tarman. So this quilt might have made the rounds. So it's not going to be super, blowing it up is not going to be super great. But so here is the block, I think, that we saw in this Eliz Sinkiewicz's book. I think that's it, because it's got this little upturned edge of the basket. This one also has a handle, but hers didn't have a handle. So, but this is what, I guess, when they say the high style of Baltimore album quilts, this is what they're talking about, because this is so intricate. Whoever's needle graced this Um, very talented women that worked on this. Okay, this is another one, and sorry, I couldn't get my book to lie flat. This is also attributed to Mary Simon. So this one's 1852. Designs attributed to Mary Simon, believed to have been made for a Captain Aust, A-U-S-T. The square size, these are huge, approximately 19 and a quarter by 19 inches. The quilt top size, so this is just a top, is approximately 93 and an eighth by 77 inches. So big, but never finished. It doesn't say, it just says quilt top, but like she said, a number of these were finished into spreads. It's hard to tell with this one. Anyway, so it says a number of unquilted tops in the Baltimore album style survive. In most such cases, it is not known whether they simply never were finished or were meant to be bedspreads. This quilt top is fondly called Little Lucy, after the girl in the lower left corner who is thought to be a character from a children's book. And so Little Lucy's down here. And you might remember, I've talked about Little Lucy before because Dr. Dunton did research on who Little Lucy was and tracked down the children's book that she was in, or I think she might have been referenced in multiple children's books. But anyway, it was kind of cool to see his research on this because Little Lucy was unknown to him. The butcher in the upper right corner is especially lifelike and amusing. Let's look at him. There he is. Perhaps this square represents the occupation of a family friend or relative. The ship in the lower right corner probably refers to Captain Aust, for whom the quilt top is said to have been made. So let's scroll down here. See the ship. It's a good looking ship. The upper left square with a plow, farm implements, and bunches of root vegetables is the emblem of an agricultural society. And then she talks about all of the names that are inscribed. So let's look at that one. I mean, look at these baskets of fruit. Oh my gosh. They literally make me hungry. I just think about delicious fruit. Okay, so here's the agricultural implements. And then you have, looks like carrots and turnips. Isn't that funny? I love it. But I mean, you can see, and as we're going to look at some other quilts, like you can definitely see like there's a style to this, that it's clearly like the work or the direction of one particular person. Okay, so this is the Rachel Meyer quilt that I absolutely love. Where'd it go? I redrafted this block. It's a squirrel, and I can't remember. I think there's like 40 some rosebuds in there. Or strawberries. I'm sorry, they're strawberries, not rosebuds. There's like 40 strawberries in there. And I was like, no thank you. I reduced them in number, but this is a fun one. So this was made by Rachel Meyer. The date on this is circa 1850. So this center square, so this is made like a medallion quilt, so it's taking up the space of 4 blocks. So the center square size is approximately 38 by 39 and a quarter inches. And then regular size blocks are 18 by 18 inches. And the quilt itself is 99 by 101 inches. So this says, this intriguing quilt represents the style of a third major designer of Baltimore album quilts, here referred to as Designer 3, since her identity is unknown. Now, this is what confuses me. This description is basically saying that the designer is unknown, but this was made by Rachel Meyer, and that is documented in Dr. Dunton. So I'm kind of wondering if this was just kind of a mistake, that they needed to update this description. I'm not sure. The flowers on Designer 3 quilts are more stylized and exotic than those on other Baltimore album quilts. Let me roll that back for a second. This may have been made by Rachel Meyer, but designed by someone else. I'm wondering if that's what they are referring to. Because they're talking about Designer 1, 2, and 3, or Style 1, 2, and 3. And it's this idea of like who influenced or who made. So this could have been like blocks put together as a kit. This could have been blocks like made and paid for and then incorporated into the quilt. Like, so there's a lot of different scenarios that could be around these quilts. And I think what they say is that in comparing them, these designer or design style may or may not have been made by the same person, but could have been directed by the same person or copied from a consistent person. So I guess that's kind of what she's saying. It's the design, not the maker. Um, so I don't know. I mean, Rachel Meyer, like, how do we know she's not the designer? I don't know. This is where I think when you're attributing names to quilts, particularly if there's no name that's been like inked or embroidered on, and you have family members, descendants that have a story, I think you sometimes even still need to be kind of, I don't want to say take it with a grain of salt, but you still have to be thoughtful about, what is it about this quilt and what I know about this person that links them. And sometimes it's a very thin evidence. It's like a set of initials and you're like, that could be her. But often the question is, was she given the quilt and that's why her initials are on there, or did she make the quilt and that's why her initials are on there? So it's often a tough scenario to figure out. Okay, so moving on along. The flowers are more stylized and exotic than those on other Baltimore album quilts. They often appear to have been derived from the fantasy flowers on chintzes and other oriental textiles. This designer obviously delighted in animals of every sort. The two horsemen in the central square have sometimes been identified as George Washington and Andrew Jackson. However, they more likely represent Mexican war soldiers and may have been taken from illustrations in Pictorial History of Mexico and the Mexican War by John Frost, which was published in Philadelphia in 1848. The book served as a model for other designer 3 style quilt squares. The Christmas cactus square on the left is another Mexican reference, which appears on several designer 3 quilts. This is one of the few Baltimore album quilts that has had extensive use. Some of the fabrics were carefully replaced early in this century, meaning the 20th century. Many Baltimore album quilts, such as this one, were enhanced with elaborate embroidery a generation or more before the crazy quilts of the 1890s featured such needlework. So the Christmas cactus is this right here. And then these are the guys that she's talking about. And this one, I have not seen this one in person, but seen lots of pictures of it. And it does have significant damage. Like you can see there's a lot of fabric missing down here. I think a lot of this fabric is either fugitive or it's just worn away. And then you can see like damage here. But still, like, I mean, just look at this thing. It is absolutely lovely. And the image I saw of it, it was very faded, like very difficult to see in Dr. Dunton's photographs, but I still could tell like this is a really impressive and interesting quilt. Down here also is this fish. I can't remember if Dr. Dunton referenced this fish or I saw it referenced somewhere else, but it's a weird looking thing. And the squirrel is a little weird too. But you could see there's other animals tucked in here. There's all these birds. There's a cat here on this vase. I could look at this quilt forever. There's so much stuff in it. But let's move along. Okay, this one I have seen in person, and I specifically included this for a reason. So this one's circa 1850. We don't have any attribution to this one, although it's got wool embroidery on it, and it mentions the quilting is 12 stitches to the inch. I guess that just happens to be the info that's associated with this. The block sizes are approximately 16 by 16 inches, and the quilt itself is 96.5 by 96.75. This quilt was misdated for a number of years because of the brown print fabric from the 1930s. So somebody had dated this 1930s based on the fabric. That's interesting. Which was used to replace a deteriorated fabric in several squares. I'm not sure where these fixes were. But I can tell you, I've seen this quilt in person and I could see those fixes then. When I saw it though, I guess I didn't know as much about fabric dating. So I was like, oh yeah, there's some later fixes, but kind of wish now I could go back and look at it because it's, they're saying it's specifically 1930s fabric. The central square reflects the influence of Mary Simon. So that's this one right here. And you can see what we've looked at. That one looks very Mary Simon. Dense flowers just on top of each other. The white and red rose wreath resembles designer 2 work, which we haven't looked at a whole lot of designer 2 stuff. But what we're going to learn from the catalog is that design 2 or style 2 is red and green, a lot of red and green. And a number of other squares are in designer 3's boldly embroidered style. The 2 different pineapples, and this is why I'm showing you this, are creative variations on the same symbol of hospitality. The bird nest within a circle of birds is a charming design, which is known on just a few other Baltimore album quilts. But the reason why these pineapples are so different, and I mean, I can tell you, having seen them in person, this pineapple is kind of this lovely, I want to say that its leaves are velvet, I think, or they might be a print. I can't remember. But you look at it and you're like, what a great looking pineapple. Looks right off a can of Dole, right? Then you look at this pineapple, and this poor pineapple's a little derpy. You're like, this is SpongeBob pineapples, like lives in a pineapple under the sea. So to me, it's clear that these 2 pineapple blocks were not made by the same people. And perhaps I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. And the fact that you've got these like really intense ones, and then you've got these comparatively simple ones, or simpler, it just tells me that this was probably made by multiple people. And then this up here, let's look at this. This is like a wreath on top of a wreath, maybe? No, I guess it's cherries. They're all tucked in there. That's very, very detailed. And you can see the embroidery in there. Very cool. Okay. This one I've also seen in person. Not a whole lot to say about this one other than the red and green. And this is a specific, I'm not looking at the right one. There's another quilt that looks almost identical to this, and they had them hanging together when I saw them at the museum. So this is dated 1846 to 1847. And they actually know a lot about this one. So this was presented to Methodist minister Thomas Harrison West Monroe, quite a name, by women from a variety of locations, primarily Hereford, Maryland, which is not too far from me. It's still a very rural area, but also from as far away as Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, Harper's Ferry, Waterford and Leesburg, Virginia, the District of Columbia, and Kaskaskia, Illinois. It must have been somebody that moved away. A number of the women from distant locations were related to those in the Hereford area and may have moved away after they had known Reverend Monroe in Maryland. Reverend Monroe served churches in a wide variety of locations between 1835 and 1860, and it is also possible that women in some of his earlier churches were asked to contribute to this quilt, which was probably put together following his service to the Columbia Street Circuit in Baltimore during 1847. I think that's kind of referencing some footnote. It is not known for certain whether the name on a square indicates which woman actually made the square, or whether she had arranged or paid for it, or was being memorialized on it. So the blocks on this one are approximately 15 3/4 by 15 inches. The quilt itself, 105 by 105 inches. So yeah, so this one's primarily red and green. It's got a few other colors in it, but it's not entirely what it seems, because look, we've got some chintz, rotary purse. We've got these kind of paper cut sort of things here. Got more chintz. So again, even though this quilt looks very cohesive, when you get down into it, you can see the many hands that were in this quilt. This I think is really cool. I mean, so simple, but not. um, and just there's a lot going on in this quilt once you look at it. You look at the border here, this like chain with a stripe through it. You've got that also going on here in um, this wreath. So interesting quilt. And you know, it just like all of the lines in it are so delicate. I think that's what drew me to this quilt at first, even though I'm not a big lover of red and green. Um, you know, and this is predominantly red and green. But there's just these little, and these are not embroidered, by the way. These little tiny stems might, but these longer stems, those are not embroidered. That is literally like microscopic with the fabric. So yeah, here's a paper cut one. Yeah, so this has got a lot going on for it, I think. Okay, this is the last one in Lavish Legacies that I'll look at. So this one's 1845 to 1846, made for Benjamin Almany at the time of his 21st birthday. 15 and a half by 15 and a quarter inches are the blocks. The quilt size is approximately 78 by 77. The typical Baltimore album quilt squares of this quilt are somewhat overpowered by the red and yellow printed calico borders, which were added in the 20th century. So this is interesting, right? You'll see this kind of stuff, and it's frustrating because it's very confusing to figure out, like, you know, was this something that somebody messed around with later and finished? Or am I really looking at something that was made much later with really old fabrics? It's, you know, when things aren't dated properly or labeled, etc., this is the confusion that is caused. So those borders were added in the 20th century. This quilt was made as a freedom quilt when the recipient reached his legal majority and became free of his apprenticeship. As with the quilt made for this other person, which we didn't look at, the imagery on the quilt implies an involvement of the recipient in the maritime trade, but the 1850 census lists both Benjamin and his father as farmers. The naive sailing ship square is particularly charming. Benjamin was from Harford County, not to be confused with Hereford, and this quilt exemplifies the simplification that prevailed outside the immediate urban setting. So yeah, this is definitely not a Mary Simon, because Mary Simon stuff was like just crusted with flowers. Whether this is much simpler, even though it is still, you know, intricate. Think about the ship. The Mary Simon ship was like very ship-like, right? This is very naive. You know, if you didn't kind of know about the fact that, you know, that there is shipping here and maritime history in Maryland, you might be hard-pressed to figure out what this is. It might take you a minute. So, but I love this quilt because I think, you know, he's living in Harford County, which is north of Baltimore City. Like kind of far north. It's like touching Pennsylvania, I think, in a few spots. So you most likely had people from Harford County would have had contact with people in southeast Pennsylvania, definitely. The Susquehanna River came right through Harford County, coming from Pennsylvania. So definitely a lot of contact between those peoples, I would say. And you can really see that here in this quilt. I think the eagle has got this Pennsylvania flair to it. All of these kind of, you know, crossy things. You got the hand and the heart. And it just all says very Pennsylvania to me. And then this paper cutting and stuff. So I love this one. And by the way, it is also in this book. Let me see if they said something different about it in this book. This is the Japanese book. Well, it is actually different. So it says, yeah, so this one they say circa 1845. The whimsical eagle and ship squares near the center of the quilt assist in the interpretation of this quilt. According to family history, Benjamin Almany received this quilt on his 21st birthday in 1845 to celebrate his coming of age. If so, the boldly designed eagle with a quiver of arrows in one talon and an olive branch in the other may have been intended to encourage Benjamin's patriotism. Um, Other blocks contain symbols relating to fraternal organizations such as the Oddfellows, which Benjamin may have been affiliated with. The stylized vessel with a streamer matching that of the eagle may refer to the voyage of life. Okay, so we're getting like very symbolic here versus, he lived in a maritime state. A familiar illusion of the period. The cutout and applique heart shapes on the ship suggest this interpretation rather than a reference to a profession. So this book came later than Lavish Legacy, so it seems like there's been some more thought in terms of these interpretations. And Ellie Sienkiewicz did some of that too in the Red Book in the 70s. The cutout applique heart shapes. Both Benjamin and his father were farmers in Harford County, northeast of Baltimore, near the Pennsylvania border. 9 years after the quilt was made, Benjamin married Jane Gamble. We know little more of Benjamin's life voyage until, at the age of 85 in 1909, he gave this quilt to his granddaughter as a wedding gift. She subsequently donated it to the Maryland Historical Society, and the red and yellow border was added in the 20th century. My guess is the granddaughter was able to speak to that, the border being added. So, what a fun quilt. Okay. Make sure we still have time to read some Elizabeth Haig today. I'm going to go kind of fast here through this book. But let me read you a couple things at the beginning of the calendar. So not a book, the calendar. The reason why I wanted to look at stuff in the calendar, even though I realize they're not super, super great detailed photos, like I can't zoom in too much because they're going to be fuzzy. They're already fuzzy. But you can see all of the other quilts where this thing appeared, right? You can see all of these influences. I mean, these two are almost identical to this. It has a book. These don't, right? So we'll look at those in a minute. But let me read you what they say. So the Baltimore Album Quilts 2008 calendar. Apparently they did one in 2007 as well. If anybody runs across it, let me know. I would very much like the 2007. I haven't attempted to like research and find it, but it's out there. And it's Mary Lou McDonald with Jan Whitlock. Now, Jan Whitlock, I know, was involved in producing these. I think she has a business, Whitlock Textiles, and I think her business potentially got into some publications. It's a very well published book or calendar. It's very nice. The Baltimore Applique Society definitely had their hands in this. So I think Mary Lou McDonald, I think, is or was a Baltimore Applique Society person. So this is the introduction to the calendar. What an exciting adventure it has been putting together this 2008 Baltimore Album Quilt Engagement Calendar. Several of the quilts have never been before photographed, displayed, or published. The 2008 calendar is a continuum of the 2007 calendar. So looking for that one. And so she's also talking about these styles. So she says, in the past, Baltimore Album quilts were divided into Designer 1, Designer 2, and Designer 3, which many have found confusing, as it denotes that there was only one designer per style. I think Designer 1 is what they're saying is Mary Simon. And I would say that even though she didn't make all those quilts, she definitely designed them. So I think it's, or she had some hand in like their distribution. So I would say Designer 1 is Mary Simon, but Designer 2 and 3, what I'm getting ready to describe to you, is clear that those are many people that would be involved. Therefore, I have changed the terminology from Designer 1, 2, and 3 to Style 1, 2, and 3. There were most likely several designers within each of the three styles. Style 1 blocks are the multi-pieced, elaborate high-style blocks with woven baskets, wreaths, monuments, trains, fire engines, eagles, pictorial landscapes, buildings, and ships. Many of these designs were taken from newspapers, magazines, china, silver, chintz, and toile fabrics, theorem paintings, and other inspirations from everyday life. And Lavish Legacies gets into that some. Due to the diversity and quantity of inspirations, it leads one to the conclusion that there must have been many designers. In addition, Style 1 blocks made from 1846 to 1848 have a multi-pieced rose made up of 9 to 15 pieces, similar to the early chintz roses found in broderie purse quilts. Style 1 blocks made from 1848 to 1852 have a paisley rose made up of 4 to 6 pieces and is named for the shape of the top petal. The rose style seems to be the best clue in dating a Baltimore album quilt with Style 1 blocks. Fabrics used in this style block include blue ombres. So that's the stuff that these like really intricate quilts are, how they get that sort of, 3D-ness is that ombre fabric. Chrome yellows, multiple green prints and solids, turkey reds, browns, and purples that have faded to brown in some instances. This is something we've learned a lot. Whenever you see a brown fabric, it might be purple. It might have been purple. Style 2 blocks used mostly red and green fabrics and included stuffed work and ruching, which gave a three-dimensional appearance. Little or no inking was used, but embroidery was used for details. These blocks were less complex, and some were based on Germanic art. So think about the last quilt we just looked at. They also did not have layered fabric pieces as found in Style 1 blocks. The roses and buds were often a single piece of fabric with embroidery to form numerous petals. In some instances, makers of these blocks modified a block design to make it unique, but the block can be identified as coming from a common pattern design. Style 3 blocks embody German folk art style designs in which the designers seem to be fascinated with animals and other creatures. Animals such as elephants, horses, cows, cats, dogs, snakes, alligators, birds, fish, and insects are found in these blocks. And squirrels. She mentions horses. Some of these creatures are out of proportion to the other elements contained in the block. Many of the quilts contain wool, velvet, and decorator type fabrics, all of which were basically non-traditional Baltimore album fabrics. The elements in the Mary Brown and Mary Carr quilts, which we will see, I think, although not made in Baltimore, show the influence of Baltimore album quilts intermingled with Pennsylvania folk art imagery. So this is telling me why I like a certain style of Baltimore album quilts a whole lot, because they have that German folk art look. And I love the Pennsylvania Dutch folk art stuff. As you go through this calendar, you will see blocks that are virtually identical to one another. This leads to the belief that there must have been a pattern available and shared in some form. The designer of a block was not necessarily the maker. However, the maker may have been the designer or may have modified another's design. Keep in mind that one can find more than one style in a quilt based on the individual maker's choices for blocks, and in my opinion, other people helping. We as quilters today often select blocks from different designers, modify a designer's block, or design our own blocks. Just as is done today, any given quilt album might contain blocks of more than one design style, dictated by the preferences and skill levels of the various makers. So I thought that was a good description and kind of understanding of what these styles are. So high style is that designer one. Mary Simon. Again, I go back to the fact that like they're always pointing to Mary Simon, and there is a diary that has like just a little snippet of info that I think gives like a street name or a person's name, and so the historians and researchers have kind of like tied it all together, and it's like those were Mary Simon designs. And there's this idea that she may have like sold like all the stuff cut out and just ready to stitch down. Or she might have sold completed blocks. People are like, I just need one more block for this quilt, and she like, well, you can buy one of mine. So that's some of the things they suspect might have been happening. So here we have again these baskets, and I feel like all of these one would consider to be the high style, this style one. And here it says the Bible replaces a central flower on this one. So, okay, let's see, let me this quilt. There's just one or two quilts I added in here too. Gosh, there's so many good quilts in here. Well, crud. What's next? The cornucopias. Well, now my question is, where did I take this picture from? Ah! What one did I take this picture? Oh, here it is. Okay. So this is the Reverend Bernard H. Nadal quilt. And they're listing it as both style 1 and 2. So you've got this high style, and then I guess style 2 means it's a lot of red and green, although other colors. So it's kind of, I guess, an overlapping style. Hey, Kenny. No, these are appliqued. Some have embroidery to kind of flesh it out, but for the most part, these are all applique. So 105 by 105, 25 blocks, dated 1847. So we've got inking, embroidery, appliqued flower, and leaf borders. Reverend Nadal, who apprenticed as a saddle maker, became a junior preacher and was admitted to the United Methodist Baltimore Conference at age 23. In 1847, Reverend Nadal received this quilt when he left the Columbia Avenue Methodist Episcopal Church in Baltimore, Maryland. All 25 blocks have signatures, poems, and drawings. Columbia Avenue. That has already come up if it doesn't come up in a moment. But what I can say, and I didn't mention about the other quilt. The Methodist preachers they rode circuits. So they would have kind of a large region and they would travel between all these churches. And I have a book that's specifically about the Methodist congregation, the Methodist preachers. It's very interesting. And they're all kinds of quilts were made for them. But I see this keeps coming up that these Baltimore album quilts were made as presentations. And I mean, can you imagine how much they must have loved this man to have made this? I mean, there's people in my family that I would take a bullet for, but I don't know that I would ever make them a quilt like this. I wouldn't make myself a quilt like this. I mean, this is some other beyond, Okay. So this is, of course, the cornucopia. And I feel like the cornucopia to me, besides the basket, right, Kenny? Seriously, I don't even have enough self-love to do this, but the cornucopia is very common. It's one of the common motifs, much like the eagle, the basket, etc. But I mean, look at these. You've got this kind of, where it's like all of these little curved pieces here, and there's only this one, and I know I've seen this quilt because I remember looking at it and thinking that's some cool fabric, but that's just one piece of fabric, and it is that ombre fabric. Double wedding ring is your limit. Right? I love it. I love applique. I mean, I could do some of these. I could do one block. I actually have a very cool set of the patterns for a couple of these pretty famous quilts. And, the Baltimore Applique Society, my friends there are like, you'll do it one day. You'll do it one day. And I'm like, even with the peer pressure, I don't know that I'm going to do it one day. But yeah. I think it is so cool to compare. I mean, you look at this and you're like, whoa. Okay, this is the fruit compote. And we see where this appears. And you look at this one. This one's got butterflies. Yes, Kenny, there is a defined, there are defined formulas. So we've got high style 1. The style 1 is the high style. And then we've got 2 and 3. If you want to rewind, I need to talk about it. But see, these are the insects that they talked about, right? Now here, this one, you've got, so I think this is a watermelon. I think this is a pineapple. These are probably cherries or something, maybe apples, grapes. So you're seeing the same things down in this one, but with some other fruits. Um, you've got the grapes, different color. You've got the watermelons, looks different. You've got birds and a dropped flower instead of the butterflies. So you got lots of stuff going on here. Also, in the 2007 calendar, there were more of these. um, I love the way they make these watermelons, though. This is something that they're weird looking. This one I think is probably the most natural looking one, and it's like where a big long slice has been taken out of it. And I think that's what these are supposed to be showing. It's like a slice taken out. Okay. For some reason I wasn't connected to the chat for a minute. Ah. You guys know I love an eagle. Look at all these eagles. And we'll see another eagle in a moment. Too many pages. We'll see another eagle shortly, because there are two different styles of eagles. Well, there's more than two different styles of eagles, but these two predominant ones. So this one, they've called it the Blue Eagle, made with that ombre fabric. And this one, actually, I think they might all be that ombre fabric. This one's a stripe. But yeah, some type of ombre. And I still, to this day, I don't know how they did that ombre. I don't know how they do it today. I think the ones from the early 1800s are much prettier than any kind of ombre we see today. But I'm still not clear on how they did those. The Major Ringgold block, this is a very famous quilt. The Major Ringgold. I can't remember if this one is still here in Baltimore. I think it is, Major Ringgold. But there's a number of these quilts are like at the Shelburne, the Smithsonian. So everything in Lavish Legacies that's a catalog of the Maryland Historical Society's collection, but things in here are kind of all over the place. So yeah, a number of these are no longer in Baltimore. Yeah, so Kenny is saying if you dip the edge and then the capillary action, yes. If you're doing home, doing like hands-on, like artisanal dyeing, like dyeing at home, but that's not how they do it in a factory. I would say fabric today, it's most likely just it's printed that way to make it look like ombre. But it had to have been somehow they were doing it with the rollers, so I don't know. I will find out one day. I will report back, you guys. Okay, this one is fun. These are Oddfellows blocks. There's a lot of Oddfellows and Masonic stuff in lots of quilts. Any kind of pictorial quilt made in the 19th century. You've got you see these sometimes in the crazy quilts. You might see some of the Masonic and Oddfellows symbols. Definitely chock full are these Baltimore album quilts. And they're just so interesting. And I think it's just because these were organizations a lot of people belong to. A lot of men in their communities belong to these. I have a current active Masonic temple within walking distance of my house. And when I did a little bit of research where I live, I found out that before they had their building and came about, they actually operated out of the Oddfellows Lodge, which was another block south of me. So my tiny little community, which is tiny today, even tinier in the 1800s, had both a Masonic Lodge and an Oddfellows. So, these communities had this stuff. See, Kenny says, your guess is it was an application of the Jacquard cards to control valves that charge the flow of dye. Yeah, that makes sense to me, for sure. I'm gonna have to pick somebody's brain, right? Somebody that knows this stuff. So real quick, some of the symbols, what they mean. The beehives are industriousness, which should come as no surprise. Oops. Lost my page again. Oops. Sorry, you guys. I'll just read them off of here. So, beehive is industriousness. The 3-link chain is friendship, love, and truth. And that is up here with this little hatchet. That's very common, Oddfellows. The heart in hand is help to others. All-seeing eye is a reminder of God's presence. The hourglass is passage of time. The tent. For a long time, I'd see this thing and I didn't know what it was, especially in this top one. It looks almost like a kind of upside down flower, but here you can see it looks more like a tent here. So that tent means peace, comfort, and hospitality. And then the arrows, anywhere there are these 3 crossed arrows, or these, it looks like these are arrows going around in a circle. That means weapon against vice. Yeah. Okay. One of the wreaths. This one's pretty common. It's called the President's Wreath. We actually, Baltimore Applique Society, I think, did something with the President's Wreath not long ago, maybe last year. Very common. I mean, like, I see this all the time. I think Mimi Dietrich has a simplified version. I think, you know, I know I've seen something like this in Ellie Sinkevich's stuff. And, you know, again, it's like, you know, it's a very thin, you know, little greenery that make these up. And so, you know, you kind of ask the question, was this paper cut or is this, you know, just really, really intricate, you know, freehand applique? You know, it's probably a little bit of both in some cases. So this quilt, I just love this quilt because it's got a couple things in it. So some of these jaggedy things sometimes relate to the Spanish-American War. But you know, they're a little bit of an upper level of applique because getting those kind of pointy things is a lot. Also, you've got this like very much Pennsylvania Dutch kind of look to it. You know, with the hearts and the little curved paisley shapes. Those are filflots. Filflots. I can't remember. But they're a very Pennsylvania Dutchy thing. We also have here the Oddfellows block that we just looked at on the previous page. This is Tom Thumb. It is a particular type of engine, railroad engine. This, I think, at one time may have been the monument. It looks like it's been lost, but possibly the Baltimore Washington Monument. And then just some of these other things are just sort of like fantastical looking. And I love this so much. Venus flytraps. Well, Kenny, Vice has been good to you, so I suspect you're not going to be getting any Oddfellows quilts. Okay, so here's the heart with berries. And this is off the Fire Engine quilt. And I'm thinking, is this the Fire Engine quilt? Let me look real quick. I think this one might be the Fire Engine quilt. Because it has a fire engine. You know, it's great to have spiral bounds, but it's so easy to like lose track. Yeah, so this is the Fire Engine quilt. Let me read what it says. 88 by 88 inches, 25 blocks, circa 1850. This quilt has some unusual red and green blocks. Many of the blocks by this unnamed maker are most likely original designs. So, I mean, yeah, because some of these things, like, you know, I've never seen anything like this. Or these, like, they're very, like, abstract, you know, folk art looking. Similar designs to the Oddfellow block, monument block. Okay, I was right. This is the monument. Without any name. And the heart and berry block can be found in other Baltimore album quilts. So there's the hearts and the berries. This one's interesting down here. Look at this. I'm wondering if those are made up of, like, is this one big piece that then maybe has some, like, embroidery? Or are these individual pieces? I don't know. Yeah, the mid-century Adam model. Yeah. Um, so yeah, and and like I think this is a nice, solid, beautiful design. But then you add things in, birds, butterflies, all the things. It's really lovely. This guy, the parrot, he appears multiple times, and you see it's definitely a parrot because it's got this color change on its wing. And you can see some of them are a little bit more intricate than others. This is another one that just like I love because it's just madness. And why? Okay, there it goes. So because this is not individual blocks, that's why this one is, I think, a little bit unique. Let's find it so I can read about it. No, that's not it. Oh my gosh, there's one almost identical to this. It is. It's unapologetically busy. Oh, you know what? Okay. So this is the Mary Jane Carr quilt. So the Mary Jane Carr quilt 1 looks different than this. But kind of the same. It's got this same like medallion like on point situation in the middle. I'll hold the book up when we're done. But yeah, I mean, look at some of this stuff. They're calling this style 3 because of the animals and all the different colors. You've got squirrels and there's the parrot. But I also see like this is some kind of high style stuff in my opinion, you know. But I mean, look at all these little scenes, we got one here. And I think this is where Jennifer Goldsboro was talking about, sometimes they're in all different directions. This strikes me as the kind of quilt that you could fold it and, depending on how it's folded or how it's lying on the bed, you would see it from different angles. So this is Mary Jane Carr Quilt 2, 96 by 96, circa 1854. This quilt is practically identical to the Mary Jane Carr Quilt 1, except that this one has been beautifully hand quilted. Many of the fabrics in both quilts are the same. One can only wonder if one person made both quilts and only finished this one. So, they're calling it Mary Jane. I mean, I don't know. Let's go back to me for a second and let me show you. I was being too speedy. So this is Mary Jane 1. And you could see it's very, very similar, but there are some marked differences. This block here is the compote. It's the blue compote. The cornucopia is pretty much the same. And then this, this vine sort of medallion thing is the same. But then you've got some other different things going on in the little corners. So yeah, and so this one says, so Mary Jane Carr, born 1790, lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is not too far from Baltimore. It's about an hour and 15 minutes. This quilt could have been inspired by Baltimore album Style 1 quilts, so the high style. The cornucopias, watermelon, flower wreath, and flower vases are common in Style 1 quilts. The watermelon block is similar to blocks found in the DAR quilt and American folk art quilt. So these are 2 other quilts. I don't know if they're in this because I didn't look that closely. Both quilts are shown in both of those quilts are shown in the 2007 engagement calendar, so we don't even have that. The top of the center block is embroidered with the following: Mary Jane Carr's apostrophe S, so possessive, right? Quilt completed in 1854. So when you say Mary Jane Carr's quilt, do you think it's because it belongs to Mary Jane Carr or Mary Jane Carr made it? It's a good question, isn't it? All right, so we're in the home stretch here. This one I'm showing because it's delightful, but also because it's got a couple of motifs in it. Like we'll see this eagle in a minute. We've seen this, the heart and berries. Um, but some of this other stuff in it, like what is all of this? You've got birds, an anchor, some hands, a nice looking trout, maybe, and what is either a lizard or an alligator. And you've got a lot of this going on. This is a bowl with these peacocks and apples. Like it's just some of it's like question mark. What is going on here? Look at this house with rabbits in front of it. And then over here we've got a beehive and a turtle. I mean, is this an Oddfellows beehive, or is this because people kept bees? I don't know. But I think what I love most about this quilt is this block. It's a cat playing some sort of stringed instrument, a viola, a cello, I don't know. And then beside it, you've got another tiny cat and a little squirrel. I just love that. So precious. This one also has the elephant, the bugs. And some of these are so detailed and like, I mean, this cat looks like a storybook cat, Right? It's, yes, upright face. But then think about the size of a cat. It's probably only a violin. But one last thing to make a point of is this guy. And he shows up in a number of quilts. And I didn't take a picture of the page in here that sort of shares him. But he is thought to be Captain Walker. So, yes, hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle. Captain Samuel Hamilton Walker was born in Maryland and went to Texas in 1842. He became a Texas Ranger in 1844 and later became a captain in the Mexican-American War, 1846 to 48. Walker was killed in La Scala, Mexico on October 7th, 1847. Walker, along with Samuel Colt, invented the Walker Colt revolver. The revolver was produced by 1847 and was used by the Texas Rangers companies. So that's who this guy is. And I think of all of them, this one's probably the most interesting because this one's got some of the other versions of him are just kind of like floral motifs, but he's got butterflies, birds. I think these other ones kind of have birds and butterflies too, and other things. So anyway, interesting, right? These are the things that just show up. Like a Chaucer character. Hey, Nunmaker, how are you? Long time no see. Yes. They definitely look like somebody on a voyage of some sort, a journey. And it kind of goes back to Oscar Wilde shows up in a lot of crazy quilts. And it's because there was this like printed image of Oscar Wilde that a lot of people got and put into their crazy quilts. So it's interesting, these cultural things that today we're like, what is this? Until somebody does the research and figures it out. Like Little Lucy, Dr. Dunton in the 30s had to research that because by 1930, Little Lucy was just not in the cultural lexicon the way, say Mary Had a Little Lamb was. So this is the other eagle. This is the eagle with like its neck is doing weird things. I think that this eagle and this eagle are like literally identical. These two are a little bit different, but still. Oh, you know what? And I did not read the details about this quilt. So this is the Hauser quilt. Mrs. Hauser quilt, 80 by 92 inches, 30 blocks, circa 1850. This one is silk and wool embroidered, and there's stuffed work. And so this one they're calling a style 3 quilt because of the all the animals and stuff. Family provenance states that Mrs. Hauser made this quilt. It was passed down to her daughter, Mrs. Berger of Washington, D.C., and then to her daughter, Mrs. Miller, who died in 1973. In 1962, this quilt was offered for sale to the Kennedy White House. Wow. The sale was never finalized due to the assassination of President Kennedy. The quilt has many interesting blocks depicting bees, butterflies, cats, alligators, elephants, fish, etc., embroidered with a very excuse me, a very fine chain stitch in both silk and wool. It appears that the same person designed several blocks in this quilt, as well as in the Ryder and Goodman quilts. So, again, like there's these identical things that, were these women all getting together and like sharing an idea or a block, or are they copying each other? Are they related to each other? Are they buying blocks from, Mary Simon and maybe some of these other women that are willing to either kit out blocks or literally do all the sewing and everything? So it's interesting, right? Like, um, there's so much other scholarship on Baltimore album quilts. Like this just barely nipped at the tip of the iceberg. And certainly anybody out there, if I misspoke about any of this stuff, let me know. But kind of going by what these books say and what I've learned otherwise. But yeah, I love Baltimore album quilts. I just, just looking at them is fun. All the categorization, of course, is interesting. I'm so glad that somebody else has done it, though. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Now, with the time we have left, you know what we're gonna do. Let me clear this off. We'll get out our next thing. So, get all these back on my bookshelf after this. If anybody wants to come and reshelve books for me, I would most definitely appreciate it. Okay, so we started the other day, we started reading English Quilting, Old and New by Elizabeth Hake. And as you guys probably remember, and as I mentioned, Elizabeth Hake, even though this is a very skinny book, this book was referenced multiple times by Mavis Fitz Randolph, and we found out that Elizabeth Hake mentions Mavis Fitz Randolph in this book. And so there was a couple things we learned. One is that the rural, what was it? The rural industries. I'm blanking. Of course, I'm not going to find it now, but Mavis Fitz Randolph worked for the Rural Industries Bureau or whatever it was called, that she spoke quite a bit about in her book, but she never indicated that she actually worked for them. Whereas Elizabeth Hake was like, my dear friend Mavis Fitz Randolph of the Rural Industries Bureau. So that was just really interesting how, the stuff comes together. And you find out things by reading them, reading both of them. So we started on chapter 1, and I read into it a little bit. But so we're going to pick up here. And let me get you some pictures. I need a research assistant. Yes, I do, Kenny. I try to be my own research assistant because, Okay. So English Quilting, Old and New. I finally took a picture of the cover, and you can see this beautiful quilt that's here. And I know within the book she talks about this. She might have, I think maybe even in the beginning of this, she already talked about this. So it's of Avers, 1825. So very pretty quilt. Okay. So this is where we left off. So she's kind of just giving like a sort of a laundry list of all of these different areas: Dorset, Wiltshire, Somerset, these different areas of England. So we're picking up here, still in chapter 1. Some can remember seeing elderly women 50 years ago or more, and this is 1937, so the 1800s, busily working at their quilting frames. And in one Devon family of 5 sisters, it is recalled that if ever one of them chanced to be idle, she was bidden by her mother to go get on with the quilt. which set up in its frame formed a normal part of the furniture of most living rooms. One who lived in North Devon can remember that her mother and her mother's friends made the patchwork sides for their quilts and passed them on to a neighbor to quilt, for which she charged 3.6 each. So I'm wondering, is that like a half of a pence or something? I don't know. She charged 3-6 each. Where are my English people? Word and Bird Nerd always knows exactly what these things mean. I'm sure that this 3/6 probably means like just a few pennies, not much. Within a few miles lived another woman who earned her living by the industry and who is said to have kept a room in her house set apart for her work. This room was always empty except for a chair and a gigantic quilting frame, alleged to have been large enough to stretch a full-sized quilt, which stood on its own four legs instead of resting on chairs or tables, as was the usual custom with smaller frames. Professional quilting is said to have been also known in some parts of Cornwall, where as much as 10, 15, or 1 pound. So 10 dash or slash 15 slash or 1 pound. So like again, I guess these are 10 pence, 15 pence. I don't know. It was hard enough for me to figure out English money when I was there, and I was using a credit card. So, um, but so 1 pound would sometimes be paid for an elaborately worked quilt. So wow, can you imagine? I mean, right now, at least when I was in England, a pound was like $1.30 something, I think. So yeah, being paid $1.30 to elaborately work a quilt. That's crazy. Many of the oldest living generation of West Country women seem able to remember either seeing quilts in use when they were young, long since worn and washed away, or have recollections of hearing of bygone quilted possessions in their family legends. One Devon dressmaker, aged 75, mentions that her mother received with pride and pleasure a gift from an employer of some pieces of an old petticoat quilted in bright yellow. Let me skip ahead. We've got another pretty thing here. It must have been thought smart years ago, and is her opinion. The same woman possesses fragments of a black silk quilted skirt originally belonging to her aunt. And so that's this. And it says that this illustration is also from that skirt. So this probably was the front center, is my guess. And then this is probably like the additional quilting motifs. There is a picture later on in here that shows a quilted petticoat. But if you've never seen one, typically it's kind of the bottom part is going to be more elaborate, and then as you get up towards the waist, it's just like a grid or a diamond pattern. So I don't know if the picture we see later is this or not, but you know, skirts and petticoats quilted are quite amazing. They're pretty cool. I would like to have one. A question often asked today is, how did women have so much time for quilting in the past? Evidence that needlework certainly formed an important part of every woman's equipment from earliest childhood has reached us through the samplers that are to be found in countless homes today, and it is well known that in large households a quilt designed by the mistress of the house would be worked by her and her daughters and maidservants in cooperation. Leisure to many women must have meant time for sewing, and in the country, the meagerness of communications with the outside world necessitated relying on occupations and activities that could be carried out at home. The descendant of a family who lived on the Wiltshire Downs says that her great-grandmother used to drive ceremoniously into Marlborough once a year only to shop. It is not surprising that so much patient and contented work could be accomplished with the needle in a world in which noise, speed, and mechanization were unknown, and women were not expected to express themselves in any but the domestic virtues and fireside crafts. Interesting. We see this everywhere. Nobody expected much of women. Make beautiful things, ladies, and keep your trap shut, right? I've also been reading Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, Good Wives, which is where my head is at with women have no rights. And presumably, life on a farm has always been just as busy as it is now. Judging by family stories and memories, it seems that in a great many cases, quilts were made by girls between the ages of 15 and 25 before they married. Sometimes that's a little bit of a not sure, here, at least here in the US. A girl would begin by being taught by her mother to make what was needed for the family's use or to repair an old quilt, and by the time she was really proficient, she would embark on quilting for her own future home. After her marriage, almost inevitably, it appears that no further work of the kind could be undertaken by a young wife until her little daughters grew old enough to learn in their turn from her. And as there was seldom any shortage of daughters, the system worked with methodical regularity from generation to generation. Never a shortage of daughters. Evidence supporting this theory comes from a Somerset quilt owner who says that her grandmother made, with her daughter's help, 7 quilts in one winter, 1857 to 1858, one for each daughter. 2 of these quilts are said to now be in America. I think we've heard these stories lots of times by, like, the pioneers. You don't have your agricultural stuff to do in the winter, so the winter is when you make the quilts, right? A very fine corded quilt is known by its possessor to have belonged for several generations to her family, who formerly lived over 300 years in Leicestershire. And it is probable that the quilt was made there between 150 to 200 years ago. Whoa! Again, this is 1937. Quilts can be remembered in a rather remote part of Gloucestershire and are said to have been of local origin, but so far it has not been possible to obtain any remaining examples. So much tangible and verbal testimony, though gathered from a somewhat circumscribed area in England, may be considered definitely to point to the likelihood that quilting was a matter of everyday routine in most English homes, great and small, till within the past 100 years. So I guess this is, kind of what she's pointing to is, quilting, I guess, sort of diminished some. And I think, Avril Colby and Mavis Fitz-Randolph, I think, pointed to this too. Hey, Marianne, you're never late. Oh, no, snow, boo. I'm sorry, no snow. It's cold here, but no snow. But quilting is kind of diminishing, except in these sort of like country areas. So like Wales and Mavis Fitz-Randolph, just northern England, was like she just in the north country. So I guess where quilting was kind of lessening in England, it was really ramping up in the U.S. throughout, from the early 19th century on, and certainly as westward manifest destiny, westward expansion, going to cold places, as Marianne says. I believe you were in, I know I asked you this the other day, Michigan, Illinois, somewhere in there where it is cold and snowy, like all the time in the winter. And so today we have modern conveniences like heaters, but back then they needed the quilts, right? As they're going through that territory. So I guess like what is kind of like circling here for me is northern Michigan. That's right. This idea that things are different between English quilts and American quilts in that, the time frames, the reasons the quilts were made and used differ, and where fabrics and other materials were coming from, etc. So I guess I shouldn't like scoff at anything she says here because it's not the same in the US. Well, moving on to chapter 2. Like I said, this is a very short book, very short chapters. We'll probably get through at least half of this one. So chapter 2, Quilting Designs. The evolution of designs in quilting can only be traced, of course, in imagination. To obtain warmth must undoubtedly have been the original practical purpose of stitching 3 layers of material together, and the monotony of straight lines forming squares would soon pall for the more enterprising and emotional needlewoman. I just love these turns of phrase. These ladies are so great. Even those of limited leisure managed to create works of real artistic value in homely surroundings, and others with almost unlimited time on their hands no doubt relieved its boredom by elaborating to the utmost extreme their version of the craft, notably in corded quilting, which there is a quilt in here. She mentioned in the last chapter a corded quilt. We'll see it eventually. So notably in corded quilting, where ornament rather than warmth was the objective to be attained. 2 quilts illustrated later on demonstrate affinity in design and diversity in interpretation. The circumstances of the workers probably differed from each other as widely as it is possible to imagine. Whereas hard quilting, as West Country folk call it, the word wadded is used in the North, survived till halfway through the 19th century. Corded quilting appears to have been supplanted at an earlier date by changes in contemporary fashions and fancies on the part of the leisured worker. Now, I do know cording was an element of fashion, probably in the mid 19th century. You kind of see it as like petticoats and sleeves and stuff. Also, I think what she's referring to is like this hard quilting or wadded quilting. It sounds like those what we would call utility quilts. They're not made to be pretty. They're made to keep people warm. And while, the quilter may have put, their decorative, license into the quilt, they're still not really meant for like, putting out when somebody famous or fancy comes by. One writer, while stating that most women design their own patterns, says there were semi-professional designers who would draw them, such as Walter Gale, schoolmaster of Mayfield, Sussex, who, as his journal shows, made money by drawing patterns for quilts, waistcoats, handkerchiefs, etc. I think Mavis Fitz-Randolph mentioned this. 1750, December 26th, I began to draw the quilt belonging to Mrs. Godman. So this isn't from his journal. December 30th, I finished the bed quilt after 5 days' close application. It gave satisfaction, and I received 10-6 for the drawing. What is that? 10 pence? Is the 6 meaning pence? I think maybe it does. Anyway, so this is from the Journal of Walter Gale, Sussex Archaeological Collection. A quilt made in New England and finished in 1801 was said to have been designed by a young architect. It would have formed an interesting side study for the writers on quilting in America to have tabulated, wherever possible, the regional origins of the settlers who had carried on the traditional designs, perhaps by some such means tracing them to certain counties in England where a local lore and design had been handed from mother to daughter for many generations. I'm certain somebody has done that work. I would love to see that. There's the possible connection between Welsh and Amish quilts. There's actually a book about that. I have the book. It's interesting. You kind of wonder like, ooh, did the dates hold? Do the dates work? Maybe. Okay. It would rightly be considered rash to generalize on an incompletely explored subject such as British quilting patterns. But it can be said with a measure of confidence that the Welsh traditional designs can usually be identified by their geometrical character, those of the North by a freer and more flowing tendency, whereas in Wessex, examples hitherto discovered the peculiarity is definitely floral or naturalistic, notably in the introduction of a central basket of flowers. In an interesting pamphlet, The Craft of Quilting in the North Country, Mrs. Robert Scott writes, we'll have to find this, if we can find this pamphlet. I wonder if Dr. Dunton has it. She writes, while Northumberland and Durham use so many floral designs, waves, cords, tassels, fans, and feathers, the Welsh quilts are noticeable for their geometric patterns, strongly reminiscent of the days of the Vikings. Yeah, those little concentric circles, the little whorls. West Country quilting certainly includes many of the details here mentioned as peculiar to the North, but interpreted in characteristically different ways, particularly in their floral motifs. These differences may well be due to climatic influence. In the North, the clearly defined, formalized flowers are simply and straightforwardly presented with the clear cut precision and accuracy associated with the people of that hardier climate. Whereas the West Country, flowing borders and more realistic flower centers are worked in a rather in a rather haphazard way, suggestive of the easygoing nature of the Southerner. This often shows itself at the corners, always a test for the designer, where the junction of patterns or change of direction is handled with nonchalance, which, while introducing a spirit of freedom, lacks the carefully planned effect of the northern examples. Um, we will see an illustration of a quilt whose designer set out to do a good deal that she failed to accomplish, perhaps expressing her temperament, yet not without achieving a general sense of composition. I love these turns of phrase where they're basically like insulting somebody. According to the aged quilters already alluded to in the previous page, floral designs in the West were made from nature. One of them recalls the fact that her mother and grandmother used to pick sprays of oak leaves, ivy, clover, and even thistles, bringing them home to study in the evenings before making the great decision as to which should form the basis of the design for a new quilt. If oak was the was the final choice, it was usual to combine it with ivy as they grow together. Another quilter states that in her designs 60 years ago, she followed to a great extent the pattern dictated by her patchwork, thus producing a geometrical effect. The more general custom, however, appears to have been to ignore the patchwork as pattern and to treat it as a piece of many-colored material forming the showy side of the quilt. The days and ways helicopters overhead. They're coming for me. Um, the days and ways. Hopefully, you guys can't hear that, but it's super noisy to me. The days and ways of all the easy to make, best way needlecraft literature and mechanically produced transfers being unknown till within recent years, the country needlewoman naturally found inspiration for her designs in simple, familiar surroundings, and moreover, not only felt no difficulty in interpreting them, but in 9 cases out of 10, she would seem to have been endowed with an innate instinct for formalism and design, which today may well be the envy of many whose spontaneity has been killed and whose eyes have been blinded by mass-produced patterns. So I'm going to leave off right there because that seems like a good place to stop. Elizabeth Hake she is not disappointing. Am I right, you guys? Those subtle insults. Okay, so we will pick up next Monday. So don't forget, I'm not here on Thursday. But I will be back on Monday. Let's see what else I need to tell you. Oh, so again, if you're following me and Jill, let me go back to me. Just to me. So if you're following me and Jill, we are starting this tomorrow. It is not too late. It's a pretty easy to find book. The title is Mauve, How One Man Invented a Color That Changed the World by Simon Garfield. I keep wanting to say Simon Garfunkel. It is Simon Garfield. Very excited to start this tomorrow. Yeah, I think that's everything. I hope you guys enjoyed my intel about Baltimore album quilts. For those of you that came in a little bit late, roll them back, you guys. Get the intel. Prove me wrong if I said something incorrect. So yeah, have a wonderful week, you guys. I'll see you tomorrow if you follow me and Jill. Otherwise, I will see you next Monday. Bye.